Hi, I'm Mike Wanko of Apogee Leadership Group. We have some training in store for you today, and you only need to set aside about 45 minutes or so. We're going to go into a primer on diversity and inclusion entitled Another Seat at the Table. Now, we have two versions, and I'll tell you more at the end of the training. So be ready, take notes, and make sure you stick around to the end, and I'll be back then to wrap things up. So welcome to the training from Apogee Leadership Group. So again, welcome. We are Mike and Tony Wanqua, founders of Apogee Leadership Group, where we focus primarily on leadership. And today we want to talk about diversity and inclusion in different organizations. So as I share the slide, I reached out to several of you and I asked you about some of your different challenges, especially as it relates to diversity or inclusion or equity. And here are some of the results we received from you. Some of you talked about, look, after the training is complete, we want to be able to drive this thing. Right. We don't want to just have a one-off training and then a year goes by and nothing changed. So we'll talk about that. Some talked about there are implicit biases. So how do we deal with this unconscious or implicit bias as it relates to inclusion or diversity? Another talked about the polarization that's taking place in this country. And of course, it's reinforced by the media where people take sides. The monologue that's taking place, right? We say it's a dialogue, but it's really me trying to convince you, you trying to convince you. And we are deeply rooted and deeply seated in our position that it's really a two-way monologue as opposed to a dialogue because people are shutting each other off. And on top of diversity that has been so divisive, let's call it what it is, racism throughout this country. And because of the economic disparity, it has also led to classism. So we got that double whammy of racism and classism that we're dealing with. And how do you mitigate those isms as you're trying to work together in different organizations? Had one VP who said, hey, I'm all in. I get it. I want to do it. But in this downturn, we are not able to hire externally. So I can't bring in the diversity that I need at this juncture. Some are saying, okay, I want to do this, but how do I measure it? I don't know what the output should be. We had others that said, look, we're trying to boil the ocean, trying to start with the entire organization, but this is really an individual mandate. Conversation needs to be driven by those in power, those in charge, those that are the minority or not the ones that really need to push the issue, but we need the majority to embrace it and bring the minority along is what another company talked about. One person that I worked with for almost 3 decades, who's a leader in another company, saying, look, I just don't know what I don't know. Is this really a big deal that people are making it out to be? And when the hiring needs are low, this just is not top of mind. They just want to bring in the right talent, they say. So here are some of the biggest challenges that you've shared, but it didn't stop there. I share a few more. Some of you talked about the blind spot. Some said, hey, because of the biases, I'm really subjective as opposed to objective. Still others talked about how hurt people and the unequal playing field. I have some others that said there's an unwillingness to admit that there's a problem, either in the past or currently, because there's some pressure from their peers or administrative people they report to that's pressuring them to maintain the status quo. Some folks just fear change. And we'll talk about that today too. Some have said, hey, I get it, I think, but where I live and work, there's limited cultural exposure. I've worked in this area all my life. I haven't been outside of the US. So I'm used to what I'm used to. And then some are fearful of making mistakes. They want to do right, but they're afraid to make a move because someone may misunderstand them and label them as a racist, for example. And then my favorite one from a good friend to the north of me who talked about the D&I, whereas we look at it as diversity and inclusion. And he said organizations are smart. And when they decide to be deliberate and intentional, then we can reach diversity and inclusion. And I told him I would give him credit. So when the book comes out, I'll tell you who actually shared that with me. All right, just a few more things, and then we'll go right into the presentation. I also asked the question about performance, some of the frustrations you feel with people in your organization. One district talked about they know that 12 to 14% of the people are disengaged. They get it. But their biggest frustration is that those people are undermining the mission and the goals of the organization. And that's the big challenge that they face. Some said they have leadership that's unwilling or unable to understand what the workers really face. Right? They don't understand the barriers that they come up against every day. Still, there are some that identify the problem and they're willing to give opinions, but they don't want to take ownership. Still others, immediate gratification, and they're not committed to the long-term goals. What have you done for me lately? What can you do for me today? What can I get out of it today? Some stop engaging because of COVID and the doors being closed. And then if you don't know the employees why, how can you bring them in? And then it's difficult if you as the leader don't express the vision and the goals of the organization and how they fit in. They're wondering, well, how can I contribute if I don't fully understand where it is we're trying to get to? And then lastly, one talked about, hey, I have supervisors from shift to shift. Some are great, some are not so great, but how do I get them consistently performing from shift to shift? So those are some of the things that you shared. And now I want to address some of those as we go into the presentation. And the first thing we need to ask, why even do this in the first place? Why is diversity and inclusion important? Well, that's a very good question. And let me give you 4 reasons right off the bat. 1, it reduces costs. What do I mean by that? Well, this is somewhat of a defensive posture in that if we are compliant and if we are following the rules, obeying the laws of the land, we reduce the opportunity of being sued. How many companies have lost a lot of money settling out of court or losing a court case because they've affected protected classes? They have discriminated against, and some don't even know they're doing it. So this is why it's important so that we can protect our bottom line and keep that hard-earned money inside of the organization. Another reason is you unleash the creativity of your personnel. And by doing that, you're able to capture unrealized opportunities because everyone is contributing at a very high level. It exposes more opportunity where we can get top line growth. Never mind the fact it's the right thing to do. Right? Morally, it's the right thing to do. If you're going to hire someone and invest in that person, create an environment where they can bring their very best. It's the right thing to do. And more every year, this is getting important more and more. If you were to take a sounding of this country, you can see how important it is because of the divisiveness that is rampant throughout our country. I talked earlier about protecting that bottom line. Look at all these laws that we have going back, almost 60 years ago in 1963 with the Equal Pay Act, right? And then the Civil Rights Acts after that, age discrimination, it goes on and on, the American with Disabilities Act, the Family Leave and Medical Act. And these were not proactive laws, they were reactive laws. Something happened A certain class of people were being discriminated against or didn't get their fair treatment, and the government intervened and created these laws. So now these are actual laws that we as organizations and professionals need to adhere to, or there are consequences and ramifications when we do not. So not only are the laws out here now, but in 55, the EEOC came about. And their job is to enforce these laws, to make it illegal to discriminate against protective classes. Now, understand whether you have an employee or a potential employee, these laws are there to protect them. And understand this, that it's not just race. You know, many people think about the discrimination on racial grounds, and yes, that's important and that's major, but also it's about religion or disability or gender identification, sexual orientation, what sex you are, including pregnancy. Ageism is a real thing. So there's a lot of different things that we need to consider when it comes to discrimination. And the EEOC, equal opportunity, equal, wow, I just forgot the name of it. Forgive me that. But it's a commission that has been put together to make sure that these protected classes do not face discrimination. I want us to understand this as we're still talking about why diversity and inclusion. Look, the bottom line is an organization with a culture of diversity, they're a lot healthier than those without. A culture of inclusion, they bring in more profits than those do not. And we have the data to back it up. So when we have diversity, inclusion, equity, all built into the culture of the organization, these organizations perform much better. Let me give you this analogy or an example, if you will. Let me ask you a question. How many of you wash a rental car? So think about it. Last time you were on a business trip, maybe you're gone for a couple of days. Maybe you took a plane and you landed in another city. You got the rental, you went to the hotel, you got rested up. The next day you conducted your business. When the business was over, you drove the rental back to the airport to board your plane. And dare I say, none of you stopped to wash the rental? I know I haven't. Sure. I put fuel in it. Now, I return the car filled up most times. If I'm in a hurry, maybe I don't get that done, but I do try to make a concerted effort to put gas back in the car, but I don't wash it. Yeah, I get my trash out of it if there are any on the inside. I try to leave it, okay, but I'm not going by the car wash. Why is that important? Well, I don't wash the car because I don't own the car. It's a rental. It serves its purpose. Use it, get the job done, return it. You take care of washing it. I don't own it. For the employee, the question is, do you treat this company, this job, like it's a rental? You don't have any ownership in the company. You don't have any emotional attachment in the company, and you feel as though the company does not have an emotional attachment to you, that you're not part of the family and not included in the culture where you treat the company as a rental and the company treat you as a rental. Is that a good thing? What about for the company? Does it make a difference if you treat the employee like a rental or the employee treat you, the company, like a rental? Is this a good thing? Well, let me use this chart to answer that question. So when we think about the company treating the employee or the employee treating the company like a rental, it's like having this contracted obligation. So think about when you're hired. Let's say 6 months ago you were brought in, or any employee was brought in. You see the dotted line going across as we're looking at time. That dotted line is the contractual obligation. It means if you perform at this level, here's the pay you will get. And the employee comes in. That's the green dotted line. They come in and they start off above the line because they want to make sure they get the good pay and make a good impression. But over time, we find this dip. And maybe you have a conversation at the 6 month mark and you see the green line goes back above the black dotted line. But over time, as it goes on, because they don't feel a sense of ownership or a sense of obligation from the company to really invest in them, their performance goes right below the contractual obligation. And that's a lose-lose. Why? Because the company is not even getting the bare minimum, what they want to pay the employee to give them. They're not getting it because the employee is performing just below the line, just good enough not to get fired, but not high enough to get promoted or have more responsibility. It's a lose-lose. But what if the company did not see the employee as a rental? What if the employee did not see the company as a rental? Now we have this opportunity for discretionary goodwill. What do I mean by that? Well, take the same time frame. Another employee comes in and she's doing well, performing above the line, really like the company likes her, mutual respect, mutual investment. The line goes up, but about the 6 month time period, maybe it comes down below the line. You have that same conversation and she takes off. And she takes off because she sees that the company cares. She sees that the company is willing to invest in her. She sees the company includes her in the culture. She sees a sense of ownership and there's an emotional attachment, so much so that she is willing to go above and beyond her job responsibilities. So whereas the first employee, the contractual obligation line was the ceiling of that person's contribution, for her who's given discretionary goodwill, that contractual obligation line becomes the floor and it goes up from there. And that's a good win-win. It's a win-win for everyone. It's a win-win for the company because they are getting more than they paid for. It's a win-win for the employee because the employee is free to be their very best. And that employee can grow if they can give their best. The other person stand below the line, it doesn't help them because they are not growing. But that person who's given their all, they are growing and they have the opportunity to take on more responsibility. If there's a reorg or a layoff, God forbid, they're the ones the employer wants to keep. And if the employer didn't do that person right, they're growing so much so that they will make a great contribution no matter where they land. So it's a win-win. And what we want to do when we embrace diversity and inclusion and yes, equity, we create this environment where employees can offer the discretionary goodwill, win-win for everyone, which means it's so important that we don't treat them like a rental. And that we create an environment where they don't treat the organization as a rental. As I said, when you feel free to be the very best you can be, everybody wins. Everybody wins. So here's the question. If we want to create this win-win, how do we create this I'm all in mentality? How do we do it? Very good question. And I think before we answer that question, we need to know what is it employees are asking for? What do they want? Well, it's on the screen. They want to belong. They want to be a part of the culture of the company. But not only do they want to fit into the culture, but they also want to be themselves. They don't want to have to wear that proverbial mask where I myself at home and in my community, but when I come to work, I got to shift, put on the mask so that I can fit into the culture where I work. So they want to be accepted. They want to be valued for the experiences that they have and the gifts that they have and the talents that they bring to bear. They also want to work for a company that they can believe in, where they're not concerned about on the front page of the newspaper or the breaking story on CNN or Fox News about what leadership has done. They want to trust that leadership would do the right thing. They want a company that believes in one and the same thing for everyone in the organization. And then lastly, they want to see diversity across the organization, especially millennials. Millennials, this is big on their list. And in about 5 years or so, they will represent about 75% of the workforce. So then, what do they want? They want to be included. That's the first thing. They want to be included. They want to be seen and recognized, first of all, and then they want to be included. And if they're included, it gives them the opportunity to be really engaged in their work. And once they are engaged, you get that discretionary goodwill where they are committed to the organization. They have an emotional attachment that they do not want their organization to fail. So they're going to do their part to accomplish their mission and help further the cause of the organization. But the reverse is true. If they are not seen, if they are excluded from the organization, from the team, they get disengaged. If they're excluded and disengaged, pretty soon they quit. Pretty soon they quit. But get this. How many people are today in your organization that have quit, but they're still physically there? They are disengaged because they've been excluded and then they've quit, but physically they are there, and we get the lose. They're hanging on enough so that they don't get fired, and they're making the minimal contribution to keep their job. This is why diversity and inclusion is so key, so we get everyone performing at a very high level. Let me share this with you from Accenture. Accenture did a survey. You know, Accenture, a very respected organization. And they said 98% of the leaders that they talked to think that employees feel their company is inclusive. They think that employees will bring their very self, very whole self, their authentic selves to work each and every day. But in that same survey, in those companies, only 80% of the employee felt included. That's a gap of about 20 percentage points. And this perception gap is costing in profits in the United States alone over $1 trillion because of employees not being included, therefore not engaged, therefore not committed. Millennials, as I talked about earlier, they want to be included, they want to be engaged, and they want to work for companies that support a cause, and they want to be included in that cause. So what is top of mind for a lot of the millennials who would make up 75% of the workforce by the year 2025? You're right. Diversity and inclusion. That's very important to them. Look, how difficult it is to hire very qualified, good people today. Think about how much more difficult it will be if 75% of the workforce or millennials, and diversity and inclusion is very high on their list on when they're trying to decide where they will go to work. And if you don't have a solid strategy in place with a culture of diversity and inclusion, then it becomes that much more difficult to bring in the right talent. So whose responsibility is it anyway? Who needs to go first in this environment? Is it the employee? Is it the employer? Whose responsibility is it? Well, I think before we answer that question, we have to talk about culture, because what we're really trying to do is create a culture of inclusion. So what is culture? Well, when I think about culture, it involves all of these people. And let me say this, and I can speak from experience. And when I worked at Intel for almost 3 decades, all of my teams, all the time, in every meeting, we talked about what our mission was and how it contributed to the mission of the organization that we belonged to, that pointed to the mission of the entire corporation. Because we didn't have anything that we did that was separate from the overall goals of the corporation. I believe in stacking all of that. So part of the culture of my team was to make sure we knew and understood why we were doing what we were doing. But there are some that, and this happened to me in the church environment. I am a pastor also, and I wrote the mission statement and put it on the walls and told everyone, here's what we're trying to do. And I didn't see the change taking place, which really said that just because it's espoused or written on paper or written in bulletin, put in the manuals across the boards and on all the walls throughout the organization, doesn't make it a part of the culture. See, the culture is what we actually do, in our processes and procedures that we actually follow. And until it's embedded, it doesn't become culture. And until all of us embrace it, the culture doesn't change. So who goes first as we make this cultural change? Is it the employee? Or perhaps it's the employer? Or maybe it's the shareholder or the public or the regulators do it. Well, dare I say, it's all of us. It takes all of us to do it. See, for culture to change, we just can't have one little sliver or subset. All of us need to be involved, and all of us need to be involved now to make it happen. You see, when we work together, we all are stronger. Our organization becomes stronger. When we work together, we are a lot better. When we work together, we win. As we talked about the contractual obligation versus the discretionary goodwill. And when we can have people working at that discretionary goodwill level, we all win. And we do that together, and it takes all of us. So my question today to you is, what's the one thing that you can do? You personally, what's the one thing that I can do? See, quite often we hear a message, we hear training, we go, wow, this is good for Johnny, or this is good for Raheem, or this is good for Tabitha. But the question today, as it relates to diversity and inclusion, what can you do? One thing, such as, will you reach out to someone who thinks differently than you do and just have a conversation? Will you seek first to understand their perspective before you ask them to understand yours? Will you have a social with someone who doesn't look like you? Will you go to another's employee resource group just to understand their culture? What's the one thing you can do to impact the culture of your organization? And as you ponder that, understand this. Because the question is, how do we change? How do we all collectively change? Because an idea for change is not the same thing as actual change. It reminds me of a story of a father and son. They were out fishing on a pond, and the father saw 5 frogs on a log, and he remembered this story. And he said to his son, he asked him the question. He said, first of all, look, son, 5 frogs on the log. You see them? He said, yes, Dad, I see them. And he said, hey, 4 of them decide to jump off the log, son. How many are left? And the young son said, oh, Dad, that's easy. There's 1 left. He said, no. So the son thought about it, and 5 on the log and 4 jumps off. He counts on his little fingers and, Dad, there's 1 left. Dad says, no. He said, what do you mean? 5 minus 4 is 1. And the dad says, there's 5 left. There are 5 frogs left because 4 decided to jump, but none jumped. So they all are still there. What's my point? An idea for change is not the same thing as actual change. We can take this training, and we have a 4-hour deep dive course that will really help your organization change and create a culture of change. But if it gets in the head only and does not touch the heart and get into the hands and feet, then it's an idea, an intellectual exercise. So we have to have actual change for us to really change. And I get it, but believe me, I get it. I know change can be uncomfortable. I know change can be frustrating, and I know it can be inconvenient. But there I bring up Blockbuster. You remember Blockbuster Video. Netflix came to Blockbuster Video and said, look, the market is changing and people want their movies to come to them. So Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, we have the mail order business. We're good at this. Let's partner together. We can become your mail order arm of Blockbuster, where we stamp out these DVDs, mail them to the people. When they finish watching them, they mail them back. And Blockbuster said, no, we're the king of video. We know what we're doing. Go away. It would have been uncomfortable for them to change because they had all these brick and mortar stores. It would have been frustrating to shut down some of those stores or create this other business because the store owners or the store employees, the store management team would have said, corporate, what are you doing? You're killing me out here. And how inconvenient to bring up another revenue stream that will compete with their main revenue stream. Yeah, change is hard. It's uncomfortable, frustrating, and inconvenient. But I wonder how uncomfortable Blockbuster is today. I wonder how frustrated they are today. I wonder how inconvenient they are for not embracing the change. You see, Netflix really took off when the internet exploded. So they pivot from the mail order business to creating video and movies on demand. And they did it so well, they started creating their own TV shows. And now Netflix is a household name. And look at Redbox. You're going to your neighboring grocery store or drugstore. There's a red box out there for those who may not have internet at home, so much so that when they're walking into the store, they put in their dollar or however much it costs, get their video, go home and watch it. And when they're coming back to the store, they just drop it right off. Convenient. No one's going to a Blockbuster. They don't exist anymore. Change can be uncomfortable, frustrating, and inconvenient, but the alternative is much worse. If I had the time, I would go into Polaroid. You remember Polaroid. You pressed the button and the picture came out, instant pictures. And then we went to 35 millimeter. Polaroid didn't want to do that. And then digital photograph, they really didn't want to do that. And then it got even worse in that when smartphones came out and added cameras, it was all over for Polaroid. Change was uncomfortable, frustrating, inconvenient. And we need to understand, especially if we're going to embrace the millennials that's coming into the workforce more and more, we've got to be ready to make the change, because it's the change that allows us to have a strategic competitive advantage against our competitors. Stephen Covey wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We got about 10 more minutes here. And he talked about the 4 quadrants. He talked about the not important things that you see at the bottom half of the quadrants here, and then the important things that you see at the top half. And then we have urgent things on the left half in pink, and the not urgent things on the right half in white. And these are the areas that a lot of people work in. And he talked about the highly effective people work primarily in two quadrants, and ideally in one more than the other. So I think we can just wipe off immediately the bottom, the not important things. Let's just take that off the table, because we as professionals, we who are being paid to get the job done, do not need to spend our times in the unimportant things. So let's just take that right off the top and talk about the important, urgent, and the important, not urgent. Now, we find many people working in the urgent and important. And we need to do that, because in the urgent and important things, those are the things where there may be a deadline approaching, or is a crisis upon us. For whatever reason, it's very important and it's very urgent that we need to do something about it yesterday. But the really effective people spend the bulk of their time in that right quadrant, the non-urgent but very important. This is the quadrant where we do our strategic planning. This is a quadrant where we get some things done that we need to get done before they become urgent. Here's a case in point. My wife and I, we went out and trained this team of people. They called us in to talk about leadership and we really talked to them about good leaders ask great questions. So we helped them move from telling always to asking questions to help others to think and to help grow the people that reported to them. But we also wanted to talk to them about race relations and diversity and inclusion. And whereas they thought that was important, it wasn't urgent. It was in the right quadrant. So fast forward about 9 months or so, we get a phone call early one morning saying, we have an emergency. This is urgent. We need your help right now. And we dropped what we were doing, what we had scheduled for that day. We made the pivot because it was very urgent and they needed help. And it was very urgent for them as well. They had to stop everything they were doing to address this issue had come up. And it became very urgent, and they did not want to do, because had they allowed us to train them when it was not urgent, but very important, they agreed, they would have been very much equipped to deal with this urgent issue that came up. And here's what happened. A lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion is important, but it's not urgent. I get to it later. And what happens is things take place. You see what's happening around the country now. This is why we're getting a lot more phone calls lately to come in and teach them about diversity and inclusion. Some are asking us to teach about systemic racism and classism, as well as implicit or unconscious biases and even illicit biases. So because they didn't embrace it when it wasn't urgent, now they had to deal with it when it became urgent, but they were all stressed out. They were emotionally drained, and they had to learn this when it was very difficult to learn because of the emotional toil that took place on them. All of the toil that they went through, and it was an emotional toll on them that they got through it, and we helped them get through it, but it was a significant cost of doing that. So what I want to suggest to you is, no matter what transformation you're going through or what you will need to go through, if we can spend more time in the not urgent, important, we'll be better equipped and have more bandwidth to deal with those urgent and important issues. I believe for a lot of companies today, because of what's going on in our nation, diversity and inclusion for a lot of them have already moved into the urgent and important. And we want to help them in that quadrant, but we want to help more people in the not urgent and important quadrant. So cultural change, how do we get it embedded? Well, as we're coming into the home stretch now, we have 4 pillars in the way that we do it. We talk about awareness, making sure that everyone's aware of the problem. And I'll give you a module description in a moment. And then the empathy, being able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. Remember, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And by the way, empathy goes both ways. right? If I'm talking about race, if I am an African American, can I put myself in an Asian's position? If I am Hispanic, can I put myself in a Caucasian position, et cetera, et cetera? And then we talk about the opportunity that makes itself available to us. And then how do we fully engage to change the culture of the organization? So those are the 4 pillars we use when we go throughout our modules. And here's our outline. The first one we talk about is the PCI-HO model. And this is a model of cultural change. And what does PCI-HO stand for? Here we go. We have the pioneer. The pioneer is usually the one that brings in the idea. Usually it's only one person. They go, we need to make a change, and here's what we're going to do. By the way, this is not just for diversity and inclusion. We use this when we're talking about transformation, any major change that needs to take place. This is a great model to use. It talks about the pioneer, the champions, those who get behind the pioneer that goes, yes, we need to do this, and we're going to do everything we can to support you. The influencers, those who light the torch of other people who may not get it, such as the hesitators. Those are the laggers. They want to take a wait and see. Let's see which way this thing is going to go before we get involved. And then, of course, you have the obstructors. And their role is to just say no. Don't want to take any risk. Don't want to embrace any change. They're the ones that say, hey, we've tried this before, it didn't work. Or we don't see a need for a change. So let me double click on that a bit more in our remaining 3 minutes. The pioneer purpose, as I talked about, is to create and cast a vision for change. But look at the obstructor. As the name suggests, they're obstructive to change. The motivation of the pioneers to bring out the best, whereas the obstructor, they have a fear of change and they don't want to be wrong. Right? They have fear of the unknown, and they identify themselves as being right all the time. And yes, you're going to be right all the time if you don't ever change anything in their mind. But the pioneer feels empowered, the champion supportive, influencers enthusiastic, the hesitators, hey, we're responsible now. We don't want to rock the boat, keep the status quo. The hesitators, they're asking things like, is this safe for me? Is it safe for us? Let's take a wait and see. Now, we don't want to stick our neck out. As I told you before, the obstructor are saying, hey, it won't work. Here we go again. It's a waste of time and money. Oh, we don't have this problem. I spoke to a Rotary Club in a local county, and when I spoke to them talking about race relations, they said, hey, the only problem that we have is that you mentioning there's a problem. There's no problem in this county. And the other side of that was the westernmost side of the county. On the easternmost side of the county, they were deep in racial problems. So the obstructor said, we don't even have this problem. Whereas the pioneer is saying, this is wrong. How can I make it right? What can I do to lead? The influencers are saying, how can I spread the word, get others to join in? What I would say to the pioneer is make sure your vision is clarified, make it safe for everyone to get with you. What I would say to the hesitators, hey, can you move with intention and purpose? What I would say to the obstructor, can you be open-minded to these new ideas? Can you at least seek to understand? And can you believe that we actually are trying to do the right thing, even if you don't agree with it? And most of all, if you can't be for us, can you not be against us? See, what we try to do is help them move to the hesitator role. If we can get them to hesitate, that's okay. At least they're not trying to stop us from doing what we need to do. So, don't have enough time to go into this very deeply, but we do talk about this in greater detail during the full course. And here's the outline of the course. Now, this is the core curriculum of diversity and inclusion. There are 2 more modules that's really geared toward the senior leaders of the corporation called Inclusive Leadership and Equity. And we talk about some things directly for them. But this core curriculum is available for everybody, from the entry level to the chairman of the board. And we talk about what we just went over, the PCIHO model of cultural change. We talk about why diversity and inclusion, should you do it anyway. We talked about protecting the bottom line and growing the top line. It also allows you to make better decisions when you have multiple perspectives coming to you. We get in talking about some common stereotypes and the art of communication. We'll briefly go over the law to make sure everyone's in compliance. And if your employers are not okay, the company's not okay. And we'll talk about how to report violations or people are treating you wrong. It's amazing how many people that don't speak up. It takes a team, what we can do together, and how we all win together. That's the core curriculum of diversity and inclusion. And again, for senior leaders, 2 more modules: inclusive leadership and equity. I hope this has been very helpful for you. And if you want to have a workshop, it's a 4-hour course. And of course, we can work on the time frame for you. Today, we're doing it virtually. In 2021, we hope to be back in person delivering the course. Just reach out to me directly or my wife. Her address is tony.wanquat@gleader.com, and it's TONI. And the phone number is on the screen, 216-505-0254. And understand this, we are a SHRM recertification provider. So those of you who took this course, if you want to get credit for it, you can reach out to me and I'll send you the information where you can get your credit. And then you get 4 hours of credit when you take the full course, whether the core course or the one geared for senior leaders. I hope this has been very helpful for you. And if you don't remember anything, think about that rental analogy. Think about the rental analogy. Is the company where you are, is it a rental? And do they see you as a rental? Because we need a win-win where everyone can contribute and give that discretionary goodwill. I hope that training was beneficial for you. We covered as much as we could in the short time we had allotted for this session. And there's much more that we can cover. You saw the workflow, the outline of the workshop, and we want to bring that to you. We have 2 modules. One is the core curriculum. That's what the outline was all about. That is designed from entry level all the way up to the senior most leader in the company, up to the CEO. And we also have a separate module that takes the core and then it builds upon the core, and that's really designed for the senior leaders in the organization. And it's called Inclusive Leadership and Equity. We build upon the core, as I mentioned. We talk about how do you become an ally? How do you make sure equity is throughout the organization? What about the mental aspects of some of the protected classes of the people you lead, and a bunch more, much more. So reach out to us on Facebook or the website or email or dial us up directly, 216-505-0254. Thank you for your time. Look forward to engaging with you and bringing value to you and your organization. Thank you.